What if I told you that 98% of men are living a lie? That they're trapped in patterns that destroy their relationships, sabotage their success, and leave them feeling empty inside? Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, discovered truths about masculine psychology that most men will never learn. These aren't feel-good platitudes or modern dating advice. These are profound psychological insights that separate the 2% of men who truly understand themselves from the 98% who remain unconscious. If you're ready to join that elite 2% and transform how you show up in relationships and life, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to learn will challenge everything you think you know about being a man. Today, we're diving deep into the shadow side of masculine psychology. We're talking about the parts of yourself you've been running from, the unconscious, patterns that control your behavior, and the revolutionary concepts that can set you free. This isn't about pickup lines or surface-level confidence tricks. This is about becoming the man you were meant to be at the deepest psychological level. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and what he discovered about men specifically will blow your mind. He found that most men are living from their persona, a mask they wear to fit into society, while their true self remains buried in the unconscious. But the 2% who understand these truths, they access a level of authenticity and magnetism that's almost supernatural. The first truth that only 2% of men know is this: your greatest strength comes from integrating your shadow. Most men try to be good all the time. They suppress their anger, their darkness, their raw masculine energy because society told them these things are bad. But Jung discovered that this suppression creates a psychological split that makes you weak, inauthentic, and ultimately unattractive. The shadow isn't evil. It's the repository of your disowned power. It contains your suppressed aggression, your wild creativity, your capacity for risk-taking, and your ability to stand your ground. When you deny these aspects of yourself, you become a people pleaser, a nice guy who finishes last, a man who's safe but never truly desired. But here's what's fascinating. Women can sense when a man has integrated his shadow. They can feel the difference between someone who's genuinely powerful and someone who's just putting on an act. The integrated man has what Jung called numinous quality, a presence that's both comforting and slightly dangerous, both civilized and wild. Think about the men who have this magnetic quality. They're not necessarily the loudest or the most aggressive, but there's something about them that commands respect and attracts people naturally. They've learned to channel their shadow energy constructively rather than suppressing it or letting it control them unconsciously. This integration process isn't easy. It requires what Jung called active imagination, a willingness to dialogue with the parts of yourself you've rejected. You have to get curious about your anger instead of pushing it down. You have to explore your selfish desires instead of always trying to be selfless. You have to acknowledge your capacity for destruction so you can choose creation. Now, before we go deeper, I want you to think about this. What parts of your personality have you been hiding or suppressing? What aspects of yourself do you judge as bad or unacceptable? Keep that in mind as we explore the second truth. The second truth that separates the 2% is understanding the anima, the feminine aspect within every man. This is where most men get completely lost, and it's why their relationships suffer. Jung discovered that every man carries an unconscious feminine side, and how he relates to this inner feminine determines how he relates to actual women. Most men project their anima onto women, expecting them to be their emotional salvation, their inspiration, their everything. They put women on pedestals or demonize them, but they never see them as complete human beings. This projection creates codependency, resentment, and ultimately, relationship failure. The 2% who understand this truth learn to develop a conscious relationship with their own anima. They cultivate their emotional intelligence, their intuition, their capacity for receptivity and nurturing, not to become feminine, but to become whole. A man who has integrated his anima doesn't need women to complete him. He chooses to be with them from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. This is incredibly attractive to women because it removes the pressure from them to be your emotional mother, your inspiration, or your reason for living. Instead, they can simply be themselves while you relate to them as an equal, not as a projection of your unconscious desires. But here's the tricky part. Developing your anima doesn't mean becoming soft or losing your masculine edge. It means becoming more psychologically sophisticated. It means being able to access both your fierce warrior energy and your tender, compassionate heart, depending on what the situation requires. Think of it like this. A knife is most effective when it has both a hard steel core and a flexible edge that can bend without breaking. Similarly, the most powerful men have both unshakable masculine strength and the flexibility to access their full emotional range. The third truth involves what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you really are beneath all the social conditioning. Most men never even begin this journey. They live their entire lives trying to meet other people's expectations, their parents, their partners, their bosses, societies. But the 2% understand that true power comes from alignment with your authentic self. This requires courage because it means disappointing some people. It means saying no to things that don't serve your highest good. It means choosing your own path even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Individuation is not selfish. It's actually the most generous thing you can do. When you're living authentically, you're not draining energy from others through neediness, people-pleasing, or passive-aggressive behavior. You're contributing your unique gifts to the world instead of being a carbon copy of what everyone else expects. Here's a question that will reveal where you stand. Are you living your life or someone else's version of what your life should be? Are your goals actually yours, or are they inherited from family, society, or peer pressure? This distinction is crucial for the next truth. The fourth truth is about what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox and complexity rather than seeing everything in black and white. Most men operate from either-or thinking. They're either confident or insecure, either strong or vulnerable, either successful or failing. But the 2% understand that real strength comes from embracing paradox. You can be confident and curious about your blind spots. You can be strong and emotionally open. You can be successful and still growing. This psychological flexibility is what allows you to adapt to different situations and relate to different types of people. In relationships, this means you're not threatened by your partner's success or independence. You don't need to always be right or always be in control. You can be the leader when leadership is needed and the follower when that serves the relationship better. This kind of psychological maturity is incredibly rare and incredibly attractive. The transcendent function also applies to how you handle conflict. Instead of trying to win every argument or avoid conflict altogether, you can hold space for both your perspective and your partner's. You can disagree without being disagreeable. You can fight for what matters without making your partner the enemy. This is advanced emotional intelligence that most men never develop because they're too busy trying to maintain their image or protect their ego. But when you can transcend these limiting patterns, you become magnetic in a way that goes far beyond superficial attractiveness. The fifth truth involves understanding what Jung called the collective unconscious and how it affects your relationships. There are archetypal patterns that influence how you show up as a man, and most guys are unconsciously possessed by these archetypes rather than consciously embodying them. For example, you might be possessed by the eternal boy archetype, always seeking the next thrill, avoiding commitment, never fully growing up. Or you might be possessed by the tyrant king, needing to control everything and everyone around you. Or perhaps the wounded healer, trying to save everyone while neglecting your own needs. The 2% learn to recognize these archetypal patterns and choose consciously which ones to embody in different situations. They might channel the warrior when facing challenges, the lover when connecting intimately, the magician when solving problems, and the king when providing leadership. This archetypal awareness prevents you from being unconsciously driven by patterns that don't serve you. Instead of being possessed by your psychology, you become the conscious director of your own psyche. Take a moment to consider, which archetypal patterns do you recognize in yourself? Are you consciously choosing how to show up, or are you being driven by unconscious patterns? The awareness itself is the first step toward freedom. The sixth truth is perhaps the most counterintuitive. True masculine power comes from service, not domination. Jung understood that the highest expression of masculinity is not about conquering or controlling, but about using your strength in service of something greater than yourself. This doesn't mean being a doormat or sacrificing your needs for others. It means aligning your personal power with a higher purpose. It means using your abilities to protect, provide for, and elevate the people and causes you care about. When a woman sees a man who is genuinely committed to something meaningful, whether it's his family, his work, his community, or his personal growth, she sees someone who won't use her as a distraction from his emptiness. She sees someone who has substance, direction, and the kind of strength that creates rather than destroys. Most men either try to dominate through force or they abdicate their power entirely. But the integrated man uses his power in service of love, growth, and creation. This is what makes him truly attractive and respected by both men and women. This service-oriented approach also applies to how you handle your own emotions and psychological development. Instead of trying to suppress difficult feelings or blame others for your problems, you take responsibility for your own growth and healing. You see challenges as opportunities to develop greater wisdom and compassion. The seventh truth involves what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Most men want to resolve tension quickly. They want clear answers, simple solutions, and immediate resolution. But psychological growth happens in the space between opposites, in the tension that most people try to escape. For example, the tension between your desire for freedom and your desire for connection. Most men either become completely independent and avoid deep relationships, or they become codependent and lose themselves in relationships. But the 2% learn to hold both desires simultaneously, creating relationships that honor both autonomy and intimacy. Or consider the tension between your ambition and your need for rest. Most men either become workaholics who burn out, or they become lazy and unfulfilled. But psychological maturity means learning to be ambitious and sustainable, driven and balanced. This capacity to hold tension makes you incredibly stable and trustworthy because people know you won't abandon ship when things get complicated. You won't make impulsive decisions to escape discomfort. You can stay present with complexity and uncertainty, which is exactly what's needed for deep, lasting relationships. Think about the tensions in your own life right now. Where are you trying to escape discomfort rather than learning from it? Where might you grow by staying present with uncertainty rather than forcing a quick resolution? The eighth truth is about what Jung called active imagination and its role in psychological development. Most men are passive consumers of their own psychological content. They just react to whatever thoughts and feelings arise without taking conscious responsibility for their inner landscape. But the 2% practice active imagination. They dialogue with their emotions. They explore their dreams. They pay attention to their projections and fantasies. They treat their psyche as a living system that requires conscious participation rather than just something that happens to them. This might sound abstract, but it has practical implications. When you're angry, instead of just expressing it or suppressing it, you get curious about what the anger is trying to tell you. When you're attracted to someone, you explore what qualities they represent that you might need to develop in yourself. This conscious relationship with your unconscious makes you incredibly self-aware and emotionally intelligent. You stop being a victim of your own psychology and become its conscious collaborator. This level of self-mastery is rare and powerful. Women are particularly attracted to men who have this kind of psychological sophistication because it means you're not going to project your unresolved issues onto them. You're going to take responsibility for your own emotional landscape and relate to them as a conscious adult rather than a reactive child. The 9th truth involves understanding what Jung called the wounded healer archetype and how it applies to masculine development. Every man carries wounds, from childhood, from relationships, from life experiences. Most men either deny these wounds and try to appear invulnerable, or they become identified with their wounds and use them as excuses for not growing. But the 2% learn to transform their wounds into wisdom. They don't hide their scars, but they also don't wear them as badges of victimhood. They understand that their healing journey is what gives them the capacity to help others heal. This is incredibly attractive because it represents authentic strength. Not the brittle strength of someone who's afraid to be vulnerable, but the flexible strength of someone who's been broken and put themselves back together. This kind of man can hold space for others' pain without being triggered or trying to fix everything. The wounded healer also understands that his sensitivity is not weakness, but a superpower. The experiences that hurt him most deeply are often what make him most capable of deep empathy and connection. His emotional intelligence is forged in the fire of his own suffering and healing. Consider your own wounds and healing journey. How might your most difficult experiences have developed capacities in you that you couldn't have gained any other way? How might your healing serve not just yourself, but others? The 10th and final truth is perhaps the most important. True masculinity is not about being different from women, but about being consciously masculine in service of wholeness. Jung understood that both men and women contain masculine and feminine aspects, and the goal is not to be purely masculine, but to consciously embody your natural masculine essence while being able to access your feminine aspects when appropriate. This means you don't have to prove your masculinity by putting down femininity or by being constantly competitive. Your masculinity is secure enough that you can appreciate and learn from feminine wisdom. You can be strong enough to be gentle, confident enough to be curious, and powerful enough to be humble. This integration creates what Jung called the individuated person, someone who has access to their full psychological range and can respond to life from wholeness rather than compensation. This is the kind of man who doesn't need to dominate or submit, who doesn't need to always be right or always be liked, who can simply be authentic in each moment. This authenticity is magnetic because it's rare. Most people, men and women alike, are performing some version of who they think they should be, but the individuated man is simply being who he is, and that presence is incredibly powerful and attractive. Now let's talk about how to practically apply these truths in your daily life and relationships. Understanding these concepts intellectually is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you start living them. First, start paying attention to your shadow projections. When you find yourself strongly judging someone else, ask yourself, What aspect of myself am I seeing in them that I don't want to acknowledge? This is often where your disowned shadow material is hiding. For example, if you find yourself irritated by men who are too aggressive, you might be suppressing your own healthy aggression. If you're judgmental about men who are too emotional, you might be cutting yourself off from your own emotional range. The practice is not to become aggressive or overly emotional, but to consciously integrate these energies so you can access them when appropriate. This integration makes you more whole and authentic. Second, develop a conscious relationship with your anima by practicing emotional intelligence and intuition. This doesn't mean becoming feminized, it means becoming more psychologically complete. Pay attention to your gut feelings, practice empathy, and allow yourself to be receptive and nurturing when the situation calls for it. In relationships, this means listening to understand rather than listening to respond. It means being curious about your partner's inner world rather than trying to fix or change them. It means being emotionally available without losing your masculine center. Third, commit to the individuation process by regularly asking yourself, am I living my authentic life or someone else's version of what my life should be? This requires courage because it means disappointing some people and facing uncertainty. But this is where real freedom lives. When you're aligned with your authentic self, you have access to energy and creativity that's impossible when you're trying to be someone you're not. Your relationships become more genuine because you're not trying to maintain a false image. Fourth, practice holding paradox and complexity rather than seeking simple answers. When you're in conflict with your partner, instead of trying to be right, try to understand how both of your perspectives might be valid. When you're facing a difficult decision, instead of looking for the perfect choice, accept that most important decisions involve trade-offs. Fifth, identify which archetypal patterns you're unconsciously living and choose more consciously how you want to embody masculine energy. Are you stuck in the eternal boy pattern, avoiding responsibility and commitment? Are you possessed by the tyrant king, trying to control everything? Are you lost in the wounded healer, using your pain as an identity? The practice is to become aware of these patterns and then consciously choose which archetypal energies serve you in different situations. You might need warrior energy when facing challenges, lover energy when connecting intimately, magician energy when solving problems, and king energy when providing leadership. Sixth, align your personal power with service to something greater than yourself. This might be service to your family, your community, your work, or your own growth and healing. The key is that your strength is being used constructively rather than destructively. This service orientation transforms everything about how you show up in the world. Instead of asking, "What can I get?" you start asking, "What can I give?" Instead of trying to prove yourself, you start trying to contribute. This shift in orientation makes you incredibly attractive and respected. Seventh, practice active imagination by consciously engaging with your emotions, dreams, and unconscious material. When you're feeling something strongly, don't just react. Get curious. What is this feeling trying to tell you? What does it need from you? How might it be serving your growth? Keep a journal where you dialogue with different aspects of yourself. When you're angry, write a conversation with your anger. When you're afraid, explore what your fear is trying to protect. This conscious engagement with your psyche develops incredible self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Eighth, transform your wounds into wisdom by neither denying them nor being identified with them. Your healing journey is one of your greatest sources of strength and wisdom. The experiences that challenged you most are often what developed your greatest capacities. This doesn't mean you need to share your story with everyone, but it does mean you don't hide from your own truth. You can be honest about your struggles. while also being clear about your growth. This vulnerability combined with strength is incredibly powerful. Now, let's address some common obstacles that prevent men from living these truths. The first obstacle is social conditioning that teaches men to suppress their emotions, avoid vulnerability, and always appear strong. This conditioning creates psychological splits that make authentic integration impossible. The antidote is to gradually expand your emotional range while maintaining your masculine center. You can be strong and vulnerable, confident and curious, powerful and humble. These aren't contradictions, they're signs of psychological maturity. The second obstacle is the fear of losing your masculine identity if you develop your feminine aspects. But psychological wholeness doesn't make you less masculine, it makes you more consciously masculine. You're not trying to be like women. You're trying to be a whole human being who happens to be a man. The third obstacle is the belief that this level of psychological work is unnecessary or too much. But consider this. The men who are most successful in relationships, business, and life are those who have done this inner work. They understand themselves, they can relate to others authentically, and they're not driven by unconscious patterns. The fourth obstacle is impatience with the process. Psychological integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a lifelong journey. But every step toward greater self-awareness and authenticity improves your relationships, your effectiveness, and your overall satisfaction with life. Here's what I want you to understand. These aren't just abstract psychological concepts. They're practical tools for becoming the kind of man that others naturally respect and want to be around. They're the difference between being reactive and being responsive, between being driven by your psychology and being the conscious director of your life. The 2% of men who understand these truths don't just have better relationships, they have better lives. They're not perfect, but they're growing. They're not without problems, but they're not unconsciously creating problems through their own psychological blind spots. They understand that true masculine power is not about domination or control, but about consciousness and choice. They know that their greatest strength comes not from what they resist, but from what they integrate. They've learned that their capacity to love and be loved is directly related to their willingness to know and accept themselves completely. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. The journey toward becoming one of the 2% is not about perfection. It's about consciousness. It's about choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and integration over division. Every man has the capacity to access these truths, but most never will because they're not willing to do the inner work required. They'd rather blame their problems on external circumstances, on women, on society, on anything other than their own unconscious patterns. But you have a choice. You can remain part of the 98% who live unconsciously, driven by patterns they don't understand, repeating the same relationship problems over and over. Or you can join the 2% who have taken responsibility for their own psychological development and discovered what it means to be authentically powerful. This work is not easy, but it's the most important work you'll ever do, because when you understand yourself at this level, when you've integrated your shadow and developed your emotional intelligence, when you're living authentically and serving something greater than yourself, you become irresistible, not through manipulation or technique, but through genuine presence and power. The women who are worth having will recognize this authentic power immediately. They'll be drawn to your self-awareness, your emotional stability, your capacity to hold complexity and paradox. They'll trust you because you've done the work to become trustworthy. But more importantly, you'll respect yourself. You'll know that you're living your authentic life rather than performing a role. You'll have access to your full range of human capacities rather than being limited by unconscious patterns. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation. becoming who you really are beneath all the conditioning and expectations. It's the difference between being a carbon copy and being an original, between being reactive and being creative, between being driven by your psychology and being the conscious author of your own life. So here's my challenge to you. Choose to be part of the 2%. Start paying attention to your shadow projections. Develop a conscious relationship with your emotions. Question whether you're living your authentic life or someone else's version of it. Practice holding paradox and complexity. Use your power in service of something meaningful. The world needs more men who have done this work. Your relationships need it. Your children need it. You need it. If this resonates with you and you want to go deeper into these concepts, make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're going to be exploring each of these truths in much more detail in future videos.